Well, welcome to the Middlesex Moments radio show. I'm Dr. Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College. And today our topic is going to be the Courageous Conversation series that we run at the college. And I have three guests with me gathered around my table. Jaime Flores, who's the academic division director for what I would just sort of group as the humanities side of the house. Judith Felton, who is the Human Service Program Coordinator and the Director of our Center for Civic Engagement. And Annie Scott, who is the Director of our Information Technology program that suffuses everything we do at the college. It's both, it keeps us, it's our telephones and it's our computers and our software. And in 2016, there's nothing at this campus that isn't touched by IT. So Annie is the person that everybody goes to on campus every time some of it breaks down, which occasionally it does.
There we go.
So we have these courageous conversations. And Judith, why don't you tell us, how they got started and the purpose of them, and then we'll talk some more as the program goes on about what we're going to be doing this fall.
So the Courageous Conversations sort of birthed after the incident in Ferguson in 2014, followed by the Eric Garner case. And I remember over a couple of very snowy days when the college was closed, I was in conversation with our academic dean, Dr. Steve Minkler, over the phone. And we started out emailing and just about all that was going on, and over those emails sharing some of our personal history with the civil rights movement and how that had impacted our lives growing up. And we started to talk about the need to have a conversation on campus about all that was brewing. And Dean Minkler and I were thinking who might be able to help us with this and lead the first conversation. And we started talking about Annie Scott, who is sitting to my left. And my recollection is that from that, Steve and Annie had breakfast one morning, and Annie started to introduce this notion of while I had just said a conversation, it was really Annie who recollected from her college days this term, courageous conversations. And the purpose we started to feel was that we needed to have a place where our community, our Middlesex College community, could come together and discuss issues of import that were both global and national, but also very intimate. And that we could talk about our feelings about what's going on in a situation that was safe, where we could express ourselves with no judgment, and where we could air our concerns in an educational, democratic community. Our first conversation was entitled "I March Because," and I think I'll remember that conversation to my grave, because there were several faculty and several students. And for some of us who are baby boomers and really had our values shaped by the 60s and the war on poverty and the civil rights movement, really told our personal stories about how those movements shaped us. And it was very moving, so moving that after an hour we wanted to continue. And so we started a series where every month we would have a conversation. And the second conversation was I Still March Because. And part of it was to try to figure out a way how we could get also our students impassioned enough about things that they would, for lack of a better term, take to the streets and really express themselves and shape the future. So, and we've had topics on the bystander effect, women's oppression, free speech, hate speech, all those kinds of issues that keep bubbling up for us.
And those are going to keep bubbling for the rest of time, I think. We need to take a break, so that when we come back, I think the first thing I would like is for Annie to sort of talk about the rules of a courageous conversation, because it's one thing to have courage, but it's another to feel that you are going to be in a safe space.
Sure.
And Andy's been handling that part of the conversations. Well, this is the Middlesex Moments radio show part 2, and we're happy you're still with us on the radio. I'm Anna Wasesha, president of Middlesex Community College. Today we're talking about courageous conversations with Jaime Flores, Judith Felton, and Annie Scott, all three of whom work here at the college. And all of us are getting ready for the start of school, so I appreciate everybody taking the time to come and meet with us. Annie, if you would talk about how you set up kind of the rules of engagement for the Courageous Conversations, I think that would be really great.
Well, I actually didn't create these rules.
Mm-hmm.
They actually come out of the Anti-Defamation League and were developed for similar kinds of conversations that happened around topics and discussions with teens, preteens, adults who are looking for some place to vent or unload, or if anything, just feel safe in discussing topics that we've been discussing, the race relations, better communications with different individuals. And so what they've developed is a ropes approach. Ropes, the spelling of ropes, ROPES, being used as the foundation for the ground rules in the discussion. So the R would stand for respect, and respecting others' opinions, respecting the way other people are actually approaching situations, the way somebody might verbalize something, respecting that they're coming from their own position. The O would be openness, so anyone sitting in the room who's also participating in the conversation would be open to hearing other people's opinions, would be open to expressing their opinion. Just keeping the discussion and the conversation open is key to the P, which is participation. So we are asking people to actually come ready to work with the others who are in the room, but also the ability to pass. If the conversation gets a little too heated, a little too deep, or a little too emotional, you can always pass. And E is education. We're an education institution. We actually are the community college in our community, and so we're asking people to come in and learn something from talking with other people, so E for education. And then we wrap it up with S, bringing it back around to sensitivity, which kind of feeds into and back with respect. So I don't want to say what stays in the courageous conversation, what happens in the conversation stays in the conversation, but understanding that we're asking people to step out on faith and to share with each other and hopefully learn from each other, hopefully be open with each other, so that we can take some of what we've been afraid of discussing to another level. And that takes a lot of courage. Being sensitive with someone else's story is key.
Yeah.
And not taking the assumption that because they told us in this safe environment, it's something that can be plastered across the newspaper or broadcast on the radio. So we're working with that and saying, okay, these are the ropes, these are the ground rules, this is how we're going to set up the discussion, the courageous conversation here at Middlesex.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking about the old and overly and very tired concept of fair and balanced. It actually no longer something that applies to what we do here on the radio and on television, especially cable television. But this seems to me to be an attempt to be fair and balanced too.
Yeah,
and because
sure.
we're an educational institution, we hope that people's opinions are rooted in evidence that it can actually be held up to scrutiny
True,
and
yes.
Examined and found to be somewhat true, to the extent there is truth.
And we have had, it's been very poignant when within these conversations you hear people disagree, and the respect that has been shown between participants. And we've sort of had some sort of open mic sessions where people come and just discuss whatever they want, and then we've also had some where there might be a structured facilitator who brings material, and it's very much more structured. But it has been extremely poignant, and especially among students.
Yes.
And to hear, I'm thinking of the one we did on, I think it was the No Longer a Bystander one, and we were talking about, how do we stand by if someone is bullied, and one student was talking about his own experience, and you sort of have to man up, and another student was talking about his experience. Both students had been name called and put on the outside in their younger years, and they had very different takes on what should be done. But just that conversation alone was, I thought, how lucky are we to be able to do this and hear these stories, Another example of stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you see those same students after the conversations continuing conversation with each other as they walk out, and hopefully the ripple effect takes effect, and they will talk to their peers, and they feel encouraged and empowered based on just the initial courageous conversation, that they took that step
Yeah,
and said, I'm going to go, I'm going to share.
that's right.
And they felt now empowered to go forward and share more and possibly bring it out of their peers. I think that's amazing.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's the skill of carrying on a conversation is one that you acquire, right?
Mhm.
People
Yeah.
don't automatically have it, and that's another element of what's going on.
That's a
Mhm.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we attempt to model that,
Right.
obviously,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
then they can then carry it on.
That's right.
So, Jamie, you're relatively new to Middlesex Community College.
Yes, I am.
You're in your third year
Third
now?
year, going into my third year, yes.
And so you've had recent experiences at other community colleges. Have you participated in anything like conversations of this sort?
Not like this. I think this is a quite novel idea, and especially having the space and this notion of safe space, I think, is critical. Many of our students that come to college at times feel that they are not free to say what they would like to say, perhaps because they've experienced more authoritative types of school systems, or have gone through experiences that perhaps have tainted their view of what it is to have an open conversation and opinions about critical issues that they either experienced or witnessed. So for me, it was quite transforming to look at this space, being in the periodical room in a library. I think is layered with many meanings, because it means it's usually an open space where anyone can come in, pick up a magazine, or bring a book, or study. And that's what this periodical room does. It is an open space. So in itself, it's already a democratic space, first. Second, for us to have it there, others are watching. It's an open space. So other patrons to our library can see that there's something special going on over there. Even if they don't participate, they are spectators, and they're part of the audience, so to speak. And I think it's important for both students and staff and faculty and others who are participating in many ways to model what fruitful conversation and open conversation can be. So there's power in having it in the library, and in particular in the periodical room. For me, I grew up in New York, and as a young child, I actually loved going after school to the library, and in particular to the periodical room. And the reason was because each of the magazines, A through Z, were in different subject areas. And so what I would do is I would pick out different magazines in different subject areas. Scientific American was one of my favorite, and others. And so it's quite telling that we're discussing, in these conversations, we have a different topic each time, yet these are important topics. And usually the magazines have very catchy headlines. So here we are actually engaging with some of the issues that are in these titles in a way that's constructive, that's intellectually stimulating, and more importantly, that brings different constituencies, different stakeholders in the college together to discuss issues of importance. One of the highlights was these two students that actually, I believe, came from different socioeconomic backgrounds. They were, and yet had a very fruitful conversation about what it is to be bullied across racial and class lines. We don't talk too much about class in America, but I think it's quite evident, especially in this coming election cycle, that class and race are intertwined. So I think the Courageous Conversation really was innovative in that we brought together these different discussions along these lines.
Yeah, I mean, I'm brilliant is sort of what I want to say about it, because what you just did was kind of tear apart the location of the space and the actions that occur in the space, and then think about them critically, which is what we want our students to learn how to do. And so thank you for that, the sort of exegesis on where it happens. And and we all love libraries. I'm afraid that we have to take another break. It's just amazing how time passes when we're on the radio. But we'll be right back, and we'll talk about the upcoming first Courageous Conversation here at Middlesex Community College in the fall of 2016. Well, we're back to Middlesex Moments and a conversation about conversations with Jaime Flores and Judith Felton and Annie Scott. And right before the break, I said we would come back and talk about what's going to happen at our first conversation. So the date is?
September 26th.
And it happens at? I can fill in the
12
blank.
to 1. This is a multiple choice exam. Yeah, 12 to 1 during our community activity period.
Mhm.
And these conversations are open to the internal community, students, faculty, staff, as well as the external community. So we try to get the word out as much as we can to members of our community. We have some regulars who come, but we do want to make sure that it's marketed in such a way that the community knows that it's open, these conversations are open to them, to the members of the external community. And we try to encourage faculty. I know I give extra credit in my class if a student comes, there's nothing wrong with incentive. So the first conversation is on September 26th. I believe we're going to be having a meeting very shortly to solidify the topic for that. On that day, the president of our Board of Regents, Mark Bojakian, is coming, and because he's been wanting to visit all the community colleges and be able to have conversations with students and faculty and staff about this very provocative season that we're in, political and otherwise. So we're really looking forward to him coming.
And as you draw out the hum on the way to provocative, I mean, this is a season like we've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the presidential election cycle. That's the season we're observing. It seems to exemplify in a way that the most polarizing conversations that a democracy can have. On the one hand, thank God, we can have these polarizing conversations because we have free speech. And,
Yes.
On the other hand, people can listen to the radio, and we know on average people watch. This is hard for me to fathom. 28 hours of television a week. I don't know how that's possible, but that's the living mythology / survey results of American viewers. And that's a domain, first of all, swamps the amount of time that a college student would spend in class and on homework in an ordinary week. But it isn't fair and balanced any longer because they're not obligated to be fair and balanced. So I've been thinking about how colleges are perhaps the last major social institution where things have to be fair and balanced. So those are the rules of our engagement.
Those are the rules, yeah.
And so that means that we've got to redouble our efforts because we're competing against the airwaves and the digital airwaves, I guess, if we can imagine that, who are really absorbing most people's attention, from which most people are getting their information and forming their opinions. So it would be really wonderful to have Mark Ajakian here, and I hope that we have a lot of students and faculty and staff in attendance. And as you were saying, the public is warmly invited, and to remind everybody, our library is a public library. So that beautiful periodical room we have is there for anyone to use, and people can get library cards, and we're connected to a large network, so you can get books in from all over the state. So use it as a resource. So what do you think about the way that these conversations have evolved? I mean, and so we had this galvanizing incident in Ferguson, which became a part of a trend because it just kept happening over and over again.
And then coincidentally, it happened. The first conversation also happened when the movie Selma was released.
That's exactly right.
And so
Thank you.
Hence the march, because we were talking about the civil rights marches and the anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March came up. And so there were other catalysts that were bringing us together to talk and have the need to talk. And I think right now, we're at another one of those points where the conversations that have been around this electoral cycle have actually bringing us to another point of having to talk. So when Dean Winkler and I sat down, Steve, and talked a little bit about how the courageous conversations were going and what was going to be coming in the future, he said, every time you say to yourself, we really need to talk about this, or we should convene some safe place where people can talk about this. We should do it.
That's exactly right.
So we've got a schedule and we've got a cycle. We say that they're going to happen the first Monday of every month at this particular point in time. But we also say, why not pick another point in time, or as some of the topics are fresh and hot and right there in the news, to come up and convene a conversation.
That's right. I mean, there's nothing to say we can't have a conversation spontaneously. We have these courageous conversations scheduled that perhaps sometimes would be the icing on the cake of a spontaneous conversation. And I think we've been challenged by the notion of a conversation versus a presentation, because we've had
Yes.
and I think once a week I have someone email me. The good news is people know about this, and I'll have someone email me saying, I'd like to do a courageous conversation about, and then we'll talk about whether or not what they want to do, if the courageous conversation is the appropriate format. I do want to put out there that, and what I hope to see continue to happen, and actually I'm turning over kind of the leadership of this to my colleague on my right, Jaime Flores, but that last semester and the semester before we had some student-led conversations. And we actually had an English class that did a variety of topics. It was sort of like speed dating with courageous conversations, and they had separate tables with different topics, and we could go from table to table. And that was really very informative. The students had really done their work on these particular topics. Gun control was a topic, things that we were really wrestling with, but they were also delightful because students were so invested. And we've found that when students lead a conversation, the turnout is better for obvious reasons. So that's been really lovely. And many of you know, and I know President Wasesha knows, that I love to hear stories, and that I'm really invested in stories projects. And I just see this, as you mentioned yesterday, Jaime, at our meeting, this notion of listening post, and that this is really another opportunity to listen, but we're listening around topics that most of us are driving home at the end of the day thinking, what? How could this happen? What is going on?
And one of the things that's actually empowering is that Mark Ojakian, who has now challenged the community colleges and all of the universities to do better with their communities and their community engagement, their community involvement, and to really reach out. And community meaning the obvious community on the campus, but also the geographic community in which we all live, breathe, work. So we're doing these courageous conversations and stepping out at a time where the Board of Regents and our institutional leadership is also behind us.
And our neighboring Institute of Higher Education, Wesleyan University, Dr. Roth has published an article in which he has said it's time to speak out. That we do need to be fair and balanced, but there are times, whatever side of the fence you're on, there are times when you can't continue to hold your breath. And I think that this is what these courageous conversations help us understand, and help students understand, that they have a mechanism for letting their opinion be told without any consequence, negative consequence.
Well, and we have to I guess part of that is placing value on people, individual people, value on their experiences, the way that they make sense of those experiences, the way they tell their stories. So it's a very, very, these are remarkable times. There was a headline in the New York Times this morning that said that the Syrian children, and there's one just horrifying but poignant photograph of a little 5-year-old boy in the back of an emergency vehicle, who looks shell-shocked, and he is, and saying this, he is the Anne Frank of the current day. So people have seen that photograph, setting aside his own personal experience, has seen the photograph, and it's become iconic as an expression of what we know is really the face of war. And I hope it has that power, because we have so many issues that we really need to address in both with policy and social action, but in our own lives. And then I'll also just say, I read this morning, today is the birthday of Mother Teresa, and she won the Nobel Prize. And she was asked, how do people, what should they do to work toward world peace? And she said, go home and love your family, which goes to the issue of those stories, right?
That's right.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Value them and love them. Jaime, let's go back to you, because you are going to take on the mantle now.
Yes.
So what are you thinking for yourself in terms of the role you'll play with overseeing conversations, courageous conversations?
Well, continuing the tradition of being this notion of fair and balanced, and certainly having or encouraging more student participation in these conversations will be a key goal for me. One of the things that, again, going back to this notion of authority, is that many of our students of color have had negative experiences in dealing with their school systems. And so this could be a vehicle for them to be able to not only express their opinions, but also have, when they need to speak out about certain issues, this could be a vehicle for them to be able to both enrich their notion or their views coupled with their experiences, and then be able to perhaps take a more active role both here on campus and off campus. I really think that the conversations are akin to an iceberg. We not only do we, once a topic is introduced, we know that underneath that water there's much more there that usually is not seen. So we want to make sure that we actually go under the water and see really the rest of that iceberg for that particular issue. So any defining issue that we may look at has this other components that maybe are not seen, but that we in these conversations can actually look under and be able to see what other factors might be playing a role. So my role really would be to expand that notion of having a critical eye, right? Emerson and his transparent eyeball, right? So we have this notion of dispersed in a sense and diffused, but also around certain issues we can definitely dig deeper, so to speak, into that fertile ground of critical analysis. And I think our students will have that takeaway from that and be able to be more engaged in both here at the college and in their communities.
This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you
So
for having
Jaime
us.
Flores and Annie Scott and Judith Felton, Courageous Conversations. The first one is September 26th from noon to 1 in the periodical room of Chapman Hall, which is our library. Everyone is welcome to join us. And so for any of the listeners who want to find out more about Middlesex Community College or these events, you can go online at MxCC.edu. We'd love to see you there in the World Wide Web and also here on our campus in Middletown, Connecticut. Thanks for listening. This is Anna Wasesha wishing you all a very good day.